And then Cunningham gets into the face of DiJonai Carrington.
We have grown-ass men and women out here doing whatever they can to try to make sure that does not.
What happens when one brutal WNBA collision suddenly becomes much bigger than basketball? Because after DiJonai Carrington sent Sophie Cunningham crashing to the floor during a breakaway layup, the controversy exploded, and now LeBron James is being pulled into the conversation. The hit was ruled a flagrant 2 after review. Cunningham immediately confronted Carrington. Teammates rushed in, and Carrington was ejected. But then came the moment that completely changed the story. While still in the locker room, Carrington posted "white privilege" and tagged the Indiana Fever. Suddenly, fans weren't only debating a hard foul. They were debating accountability, race, player safety, Caitlin Clark, Sophie Cunningham, and whether the WNBA has allowed physical play to cross a dangerous line. And because LeBron has publicly supported Clark before, fans are now asking one explosive question. What happens when the biggest basketball superstar on the planet finally decides enough is enough? The entire controversy began with a play that lasted only a few seconds. Sophie Cunningham was running ahead on a breakaway, with the basket directly in front of her. According to the transcript, she had a clear path to the rim and successfully completed the layup. But DiJonai Carrington had chased the play down from behind, and as Cunningham went up, Carrington swung her left arm across Cunningham's face and neck area. Cunningham crashed hard onto the floor. That single sequence immediately changed the mood inside the arena. What might normally have been described as an aggressive defensive play quickly became something much more serious because of the location and force of the contact. The officials initially called it a flagrant 1, but after review, the foul was upgraded to a flagrant 2. Carrington was ejected from the game, and Cunningham did not simply stay on the floor. She immediately got back up and confronted Carrington. The transcript describes Nalissa Smith attempting to de-escalate the situation while security also moved in. A brief confrontation followed, and the crowd reacted loudly as Carrington headed toward the locker room. But the basketball itself was only the beginning. The bigger controversy came minutes later. According to the transcript, Carrington posted the words "white privilege" on Threads while still connected to the game, and she tagged the Indiana Fever. That post instantly transformed a physical basketball incident into a social and political argument. Now fans were asking questions that had nothing to do with the box score. Was the foul intentional? Was it simply an aggressive attempt to stop a layup? Did Cunningham's public comments about women's sports play a role in the tension surrounding her? And why did Carrington immediately bring race into the conversation? Those questions divided fans almost instantly. Some commentators argued that the contact was clearly excessive and deserved the flagrant 2 ruling. Others insisted there was no evidence that Carrington intended to injure Cunningham and argued that basketball plays can become dangerous without malicious intent. That distinction is important. The transcript itself includes commentary arguing both sides of the intent question. One voice says Carrington was trying to make a basketball play and did not intentionally target Cunningham's neck. Another side argues that the wind-up, follow-through, and potential for injury made the flagrant 2 decision obvious. So there is a genuine disagreement about intent. But there is much less disagreement about what happened next. Cunningham got up. She confronted Carrington. Carrington was ejected. And then the social media post appeared. That was the moment the story escaped the basketball court. The Fever were already one of the most heavily discussed teams in the league because of Caitlin Clark. Cunningham had also become a highly visible personality because of her outspoken public comments and social media presence. That meant every moment surrounding the game was likely to attract enormous attention. And this one did. The transcript repeatedly connects the incident to previous physical plays involving Clark and other players. It references Carrington's earlier encounter with Clark during the playoffs and points to other incidents that have fueled debate about physicality around Indiana. This is where the LeBron James angle becomes especially powerful. LeBron is not a random celebrity being inserted into the story. The transcript points out that he has publicly supported Caitlin Clark, including reaching out when she was injured and praising her after a historic performance. It also references his public CC effect, welcome back, message when Clark returned. That history matters because LeBron understands what happens when a young superstar becomes the center of an entire sports ecosystem. He understands pressure. He understands physical defense. He understands controversial officiating. And he understands how quickly one play can become a national conversation. But here's where the story needs to remain honest. The transcript does not provide a direct LeBron statement saying he condemned Carrington's foul. It does not show a verified LeBron post specifically responding to Cunningham's injury. Instead, what we have is a documented relationship between LeBron and Clark, combined with a controversy involving Clark's teammate and a player who has previously been involved in heated physical moments with Clark. That is enough to make fans speculate. It is not enough to invent a quote. And that distinction is exactly what makes the story more compelling. Because the question isn't simply, did LeBron attack Carrington? The bigger question is, would LeBron see this as another example of the kind of physical treatment that has surrounded Caitlin Clark and the Fever? That is the question fans are now debating. And as the controversy grows, every previous incident is being dragged back into the spotlight. If Sophie Cunningham had taken the exact same hit while playing for a different team, would the story have become this massive? That is one of the biggest questions surrounding the controversy. But Cunningham is not just another player. She is a member of the Indiana Fever. And the Indiana Fever are home to Caitlin Clark. That changes everything. Clark has become one of the most recognizable athletes in basketball, and every controversial moment involving the Fever receives enormous attention from fans, commentators, former players, and celebrities. The transcript makes that connection repeatedly. It references LeBron James' publicly documented support for Clark, including his message during her injury and his praise for her historic 45-point, 10-assist performance. That history is important because LeBron has not simply acknowledged Clark as another basketball player. He has publicly encouraged her. He has called attention to her accomplishments. And the transcript describes Clark calling LeBron her idol and the GOAT. So, when a physical incident involving another Fever player becomes controversial, fans naturally wonder whether LeBron is paying attention. But there is another layer. Carrington has history with Clark. The transcript recalls an earlier playoff incident involving Clark in which Carrington made contact with Clark's face. Carrington later said she did not intend to hit Clark and explained that she was attempting to make a play on the ball. That earlier explanation becomes relevant because the same debate has now returned. Intent versus impact. That is the central issue. A defender does not necessarily intend to injure someone simply because a foul causes serious contact. Basketball is fast. Players move at incredible speed. Defensive attempts can go wrong. But the opposite argument is also powerful. Players are responsible for controlling their bodies. When contact occurs around the head and neck, the consequences can be much more serious. That is why the flagrant 2 ruling became such a major talking point. The transcript states that officials determined the contact was excessive enough to warrant ejection. And once the ejection happened, the social media post created an entirely different controversy. White privilege. 2 words. But those 2 words opened a completely separate debate. Some commentators viewed the post as an attempt to shift attention away from the foul. Others argued that racial dynamics cannot simply be removed from the discussion. And that is where the story becomes complicated. There are people on both sides. Some fans believe the entire incident should remain focused on basketball safety. They argue that the foul should be judged based on what happened on the court, regardless of the player's race or political opinions. Others believe that the surrounding social context matters, particularly because Cunningham has publicly discussed controversial issues involving women's sports. The transcript connects Cunningham's public statements to the backlash she has received and suggests that the incident occurred during a period when she was already receiving criticism. But again, there is a line between speculation and evidence. The transcript does not establish as fact that Carrington attacked Cunningham because of her opinions. That is an allegation raised by commentators. And that distinction matters. A viral YouTube script can ask the question. It can examine the possibility. It can show viewers why people are suspicious. But it should not present an unverified motive as proven fact. That makes the story more credible. And ironically, it also makes it more powerful. because now viewers are forced to make up their own minds. Was this simply a dangerous defensive play? Was it an emotional reaction between two players? Was there deeper tension because of Cunningham's public comments? Or did the social media post make the incident appear far more political than it originally was? Those questions are still being debated. And then there is LeBron. Imagine the perspective of someone who has watched Caitlin Clark become one of the most heavily defended and heavily targeted athletes in basketball. LeBron knows that stars attract attention. He knows that physical defense is part of professional sports. He also knows that there is a difference between tough basketball and reckless basketball. That is why the LeBron angle has become so attractive to fans. Not because the transcript proves he issued a specific condemnation. It doesn't. But because his previous public support for Clark gives him a natural connection to the discussion. And there is another reason fans care. LeBron is one of the few basketball personalities whose opinion can immediately dominate the conversation. One post from him could generate millions of views. One sentence could become a headline. One reaction could change the tone of the debate. So when fans say LeBron didn't hold back, what they are really responding to is the expectation that, given his relationship with Clark and his understanding of basketball, his perspective would matter. That expectation is what makes this, because the incident isn't isolated anymore. It is being viewed through the lens of Caitlin Clark, through the lens of Sophie Cunningham, through the lens of Carrington's previous incidents, through the lens of race and social media, and through the lens of whether the WNBA is doing enough to protect its players. The foul may have lasted seconds. The argument surrounding it could last for weeks. Now comes the part of the story that has fans asking whether this controversy was predictable. The transcript repeatedly references a previous warning from Jason Whitlock. Months before the Cunningham incident, Whitlock publicly criticized Carrington's physical style and argued that the league needed to intervene before someone was seriously injured. The transcript specifically connects that warning to an earlier incident involving Jessica Shepard, where Carrington's fingernails scraped across Shepard's face. That warning is now being revisited because Cunningham became the latest player to suffer significant contact around the face and neck area. And that creates an uncomfortable question for the WNBA. What happens when a league is warned about a player's physical style and another serious incident later occurs? Does that mean the league caused the incident? Not necessarily. That would be too strong a conclusion. Players make their own decisions on the court. Basketball is unpredictable. And the transcript itself includes commentary arguing that Carrington did not intend to injure Cunningham. But the league still has a responsibility to establish standards. That is what disciplinary systems are for. Flagrant fouls exist because certain types of contact create unnecessary risk. Ejections exist because some actions cross a line. Suspensions exist because leagues need consequences when the same controversies keep appearing. That is why the next disciplinary decision becomes so important. The transcript argues that a simple fine or short suspension would not be enough. Other commentators argue that the incident should be judged independently and that intent should be considered. And that debate is completely legitimate. The central question is not whether Carrington is a bad player. The question is whether the punishment should reflect the seriousness of the contact and the broader history. That distinction is crucial, because labeling an athlete as malicious without proof is unfair. But ignoring repeated dangerous incidents can also create a dangerous environment. This is where the Caitlin Clark connection returns. The transcript references multiple incidents involving Clark and Carrington. It also mentions other physical plays involving Clark and other WNBA players. Whether every one of those plays was intentional is a separate question. The larger issue is perception. Clark's enormous popularity means every physical collision involving her becomes magnified. A normal basketball play can become a viral clip within minutes. A missed call can become a national debate. A hard foul can dominate sports media. And a social media post can turn the entire situation into a culture war argument. That is the environment the Fever operate in. It is also why Sophie Cunningham's response became so interesting. Instead of launching a huge public attack, Cunningham reportedly gave a relatively short response after the game. She said she had never really spoken with Carrington and had no beef with her, while suggesting Carrington had some pent-up frustration. Then she essentially dismissed the drama with a calm attitude. That response stands in sharp contrast to the explosion happening online. Cunningham's message was basically, if you have something to get out, get it out. I can take it. That approach gave fans another reason to rally behind her. Because viewers love moments when an athlete appears calm while everyone else is losing control. The image of Cunningham clapping as Carrington walked toward the tunnel also became a major talking point. The transcript describes fans turning that image into a viral moment across social platforms. And this is where the entire controversy becomes bigger than one foul. There are now competing narratives. One side sees Cunningham as a player who is attacked and then refused to play the victim. Another side sees the backlash against Carrington as evidence that racial tensions are influencing how fans interpret the incident. A third group wants everyone to stop talking about politics and focus on basketball. And somewhere in the middle is the actual footage. The footage shows what happened. But footage does not automatically reveal intent. That is why this debate will continue. Then comes the LeBron James factor. LeBron has spent his entire career dealing with physical defense. He knows exactly what it means to be targeted by opponents trying to slow down a superstar. He has also spoken publicly about social issues throughout his career. So fans are interested in how he might interpret a situation where basketball, race, social media, and player safety all collide. But again, the transcript does not provide a direct LeBron statement about Carrington. What it does establish is his connection with Clark and his history of publicly supporting her. That is enough to make him relevant to the conversation. But it does not justify creating a fake quote. The strongest version of this story is therefore not. LeBron said Carrington must be suspended. The strongest version is, LeBron's long-standing support for Clark puts him at the center of a debate that has now engulfed the Fever. That is a much more believable angle. And it raises another question. If the WNBA wants to protect its growing popularity, how should it handle controversies like this? Because the league is growing. The stars are becoming bigger. The audiences are becoming louder. And the social media stakes are enormous. Every controversial play now has the potential to become a national story. That means discipline cannot simply be about punishment. It is also about maintaining credibility. Players need to know where the line is. Fans need to believe the line is applied consistently. And teams need confidence that dangerous contact will be taken seriously. That is why this incident matters. Not because one player hit another, but because the incident has reopened every unresolved debate surrounding physicality in the WNBA. And when Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever are involved, those debates become impossible to ignore. The basketball game ended. The controversy didn't. In fact, the real explosion happened online. According to the transcript, Carrington posted white privilege on Threads shortly after being ejected and tagged the Indiana Fever. That decision immediately created a second story. Now viewers weren't simply replaying the foul. They were analyzing the post. Why mention race? Why tag the Fever? Was the post connected to Cunningham's public opinions? Was it frustration in the heat of the moment? Or was Carrington deliberately sending a message? Nobody watching from the outside can know her private intention with certainty. That is why the smartest approach is to separate facts from interpretation. Fact: she was ejected. Fact: the foul was upgraded to flagrant 2. Fact: she posted white privilege. Fact: she tagged the Fever. Fact: Cunningham publicly responded without turning the situation into a massive personal feud. Everything beyond that enters interpretation. And interpretation is exactly what social media feeds on. One viral account calls the foul assault. Another calls it normal basketball. One side says Cunningham was targeted. Another says Carrington was simply making a legitimate defensive attempt. One side says the white privilege post proves motive. Another says it was a reaction to the larger environment surrounding the Fever. And then LeBron enters the conversation. Why? Because LeBron's name carries enormous weight. The transcript establishes that LeBron reached out to Clark during her injury and publicly celebrated her return. It also describes his praise for Clark's historic performance. That means LeBron is already connected to the Fever conversation. He doesn't need to officially comment for fans to wonder what he thinks. And that's where the headline becomes irresistible. LeBron James didn't hold back. It sounds like a bombshell, but the actual story is more nuanced. There is no direct statement in the supplied transcript showing LeBron publicly attacking Carrington after the Cunningham incident. Instead, the transcript presents his established relationship with Clark as the reason his potential perspective matters. That distinction should not weaken the story. It should make the audience more curious. Because now the question becomes, if LeBron does respond, what would he say? Would he defend Cunningham? Would he criticize the physicality? Would he tell fans to stop turning basketball into a racial argument? Would he simply support the Fever? Or would he stay completely silent? Any of those possibilities would create headlines. And that's because LeBron has become bigger than basketball. When he speaks, athletes listen. Fans listen. Media outlets react. Social media explodes. One sentence can dominate an entire news cycle. But there is another interesting part of this controversy. Cunningham herself did not appear to be interested in turning the incident into a personal war. The transcript quotes her as saying she had no beef with Carrington and had never really spoken with her. That response is important because it creates a contrast. Carrington's social media post became a political statement. Cunningham's response stayed closer to the basketball court. That difference is exactly what fans noticed. And then came another moment. Carrington reportedly declined to comment to reporters after the game. The transcript emphasizes the contrast between posting online and not addressing reporters directly. That is not automatically evidence of guilt or wrongdoing. Athletes have the right to decline media questions. But from a public relations perspective, it left the social media post as one of the loudest pieces of communication surrounding the incident. And once something goes viral, context becomes harder to control. The Fever won the game despite everything happening around them. The transcript says Indiana won 90-86. That result matters. Because despite the chaos, the controversy, the crowd reaction, the ejection, and the social media explosion, the Fever still finished the night with a victory. That becomes another storyline. The team didn't collapse. The players continued competing. And Cunningham remained part of the game after the confrontation. Now imagine the pressure on the WNBA. The league has to consider player safety. It has to consider discipline. It has to consider the social media consequences. It has to consider the public perception of fairness. And it has to do all of this while the league is experiencing enormous growth. That is why this incident could become a defining moment. Not necessarily because it changes the entire league, but because it forces another conversation about where competitive intensity ends and dangerous play begins. And if LeBron really does decide to weigh in, the impact could be enormous, because his involvement would connect the WNBA controversy to one of the biggest voices in basketball history. That is the part fans cannot stop discussing. Not just, was the foul dirty? But, who is going to hold the league accountable? And perhaps even more importantly, will the league respond before another player gets hurt? That is the question sitting underneath everything. Now, the biggest question is not what happened. Everyone has seen what happened. The biggest question is what happens next. The WNBA has to decide how seriously it wants to treat the incident. Carrington was already ejected because the foul was upgraded to flagrant 2. But ejection is only the immediate punishment. A league investigation and possible suspension are separate matters. The transcript argues that the incident deserves more than a simple fine because of the broader history being discussed. Other voices argue that intent matters and that the fall should not automatically be treated as proof of malicious behavior. That disagreement will likely continue. And it should. Because the WNBA cannot create discipline based entirely on internet outrage. At the same time, it cannot ignore legitimate concerns about player safety simply because the game is physical. The league needs a standard. A consistent standard. That is what fans are demanding. And that is where the Fever become important again. The Indiana Fever have become one of the most watched teams in professional basketball. Caitlin Clark is a massive star. Sophie Cunningham has developed a highly visible public personality. And every controversy involving the team attracts attention far beyond the WNBA's traditional audience. That creates enormous pressure. it also creates enormous opportunity. The league can use this moment to show that player safety matters regardless of who the players are. Not white players, not black players, not stars, not role players. Everyone. The rules have to apply consistently. That should be the central issue. Because once race enters the conversation, the debate becomes almost impossible to control. The transcript includes highly charged commentary from multiple sides, including accusations of racism and claims that racism is being unfairly inserted into a basketball incident. Those statements represent the polarized environment surrounding the story, but they should not automatically be treated as established facts. The responsible conclusion is simpler. A dangerous basketball play happened. A player was ejected. A controversial social media post followed. And the incident reopened existing debates about race, physicality, player safety, and the treatment of the Indiana Fever. That alone is enough for a major story. Then there is Caitlin Clark. Clark has already experienced intense scrutiny throughout her professional career. The transcript references previous physical incidents involving her, including the Carrington playoff encounter. It also describes LeBron as someone who has publicly supported Clark. That gives the entire story an additional emotional layer. Fans are not only defending Sophie Cunningham. Many are defending what they believe the Fever represent. For some, the Fever represent the future of the league. For others, the team represents a culture war flashpoint. For others, it is simply a basketball team trying to win games. Those three perspectives collide every time controversy strikes. And that's why LeBron's role is so interesting. He doesn't have to publicly attack anyone to influence the conversation. His previous support for Clark already tells fans that he is paying attention to her career. His stature means people will continue asking for his opinion. And if he ever chooses to speak directly about the incident, his words could completely change the narrative. But until there is a verified statement, viewers should be careful with headlines claiming that LeBron has already condemned Carrington. The supplied transcript does not establish that. What it establishes is something potentially even more interesting. LeBron has already shown that he cares about Clark's journey. The Fever are now at the center of another major controversy. And one of Clark's teammates was involved in an incident that has sparked national debate. So the question remains open. Would LeBron step in? Would he defend Cunningham? Would he call for stronger player safety standards? Would he tell everyone to stop making the incident about race? Or would he simply let the league handle it? Nobody knows. And that's exactly why viewers are still watching. The next matchup on August 23rd, as referenced in the transcript, adds another layer of anticipation. The teams are expected to face each other again, meaning the emotional temperature surrounding the matchup could be much higher than usual. Will Cunningham and Carrington speak? Will they ignore each other? Will the crowd react? Will the officials call the game more tightly? Will another hard foul create another controversy? Those are legitimate questions. And the most important question is whether everyone can keep the next game about basketball. Because the WNBA does not need another controversy to prove how passionate its fans are. The league already has passionate fans. What it needs is credibility. It needs players to trust the rules. It needs fans to trust the officials. And it needs controversial incidents to be handled in a way that doesn't make people believe the outcome depends on which team or player is involved. That is the real test. Not Carrington versus Cunningham. Not Clark versus Carrington. Not black versus white. Not Fever versus Sky. The real test is whether professional basketball can enforce its standards consistently while allowing players to compete aggressively. And that is where the LeBron James angle comes full circle. LeBron represents the highest level of basketball experience. He knows that physicality is part of the sport. But he also knows that stars need protection from unnecessary danger. If he chooses to speak, the basketball world will listen. If he stays silent, fans will still debate what he might think. Either way, his connection to Caitlin Clark ensures that his name will remain attached to this conversation. And perhaps that is the biggest lesson from this entire controversy. A single foul can last 3 seconds. A single social media post can last forever. And when millions of fans are watching, the real game often continues long after the final buzzer. So now I want to hear from you. Was DiJonai Carrington's foul on Sophie Cunningham simply an aggressive basketball play that went too far? Or did it cross a line that the WNBA needs to take much more seriously? And what about the white privilege post? Was that a fair expression of Carrington's frustration, or did it make an already explosive situation even worse? Most importantly, if LeBron James decides to speak publicly about this controversy, what do you think he should say? Drop your opinion in the comments. And if you want more breaking WNBA drama, Caitlin Clark updates, and the stories the mainstream sports world keeps debating, hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay locked in.